to look at this diverse audience and feel very good about our community and our community's investment in our future.
What I want to know is, will you, as mayoral candidates, allocate $1 million or more for these babies, so their life won't be ruined in the pursuit of trying to get money? So I need to know your commitment to the young people in this city.
With that $1 million comes cuts somewhere. Is it police, fire, parks and recreation? Is it libraries? Is it where? But to do a million on top of the resources that we're already providing, we can't do that.
September 2007, you were on council, sir.
And it would be my commitment to do everything I can within my power to find the revenues that we would need to fund the $1 million. And that's one of the things that's kind of been a little disappointing, is that when you look back over the last two administrations, the one thing that Mayor Baker always seemed to be able to do was to find the revenues, whether he found them in Tallahassee, he found them in Washington, or he found them from public-private partnerships.
I think $1 million is money well spent, because we're going to have to address it. We can do nothing less. And I was not on that council that denied the summer jobs, you will recall, because I do understand how important that program is. And it was stunning to me that that decision was made when we had incredible amounts of revenues collected as a result of the run-up in the real estate prices. And that actually accounts for a lot of those fund balances that grew during that period of time. And it's unconscionable to me that we lost that opportunity. I look at that as lost opportunity for kids, and who knows.
There's comments. It's hard to have a seamless city when you're not investing equally in all areas of the community. As to the answer to your question, I want to see service learning in every school in St. Petersburg, starting in elementary school, because it's never too early for our kids to learn what it is to give back to their community, all the way through high school.
I know nobody wants to talk about this. Our newspapers won't write about it, and TV news will talk about anything but it. But anyone who's studied this, and certainly the folks who've been on the business end of it, know that the primary reason for the growing socioeconomic gap between blacks and whites in this city and most cities around here is government-sponsored institutional racism. What I'd like all three candidates to answer is their understanding of what institutional racism does to St. Petersburg and what they're willing to do about it.
Great.
Susie sitting next door knows something that they don't, and I don't want any child to feel like they're being left out. So I think we can help fill that gap to get kids out in the private sector in the way of shareholders. We lose. And I think that's been a great, huge change that we have seen here in the United States. And that's why we see a bigger gap between the rich and the poor. And that is a problem that we're seeing. Government is one way that we have been able to offer folks still a good paying job with benefits. And we have seen where there are still differences in who has what jobs where in our municipal government. It's better than others, but we know from certain instances that how employees are treated within the city is different. For example, when statements are taken from police officers, are they sworn in?
To me, institutional racism is discrimination regarding housing and the ability to get affordable housing. Institutional racism is cities spending more of its money in the Northeast and in downtown than in other areas of the city. Institutional racism is in black youths being arrested at 5 to 1 for possession of small amounts of marijuana compared to white youths. That type of thing, and being saddled with a record and a misdemeanor that makes it difficult to get jobs, that makes it difficult to get into college, when other options are available like civil citations. That's institutional racism, and it's deep-seated. And you talk about Central Avenue. I've talked about this previously. Central Avenue is like the Great Wall of China. It's this border that if you live to the north, you don't cross. And if we don't ever change that perception, nothing is going to change in this community. We have to start breaking down these barriers if we're going to really have a city that's equal, where everyone has the same options to get jobs, the same opportunities to get jobs, to get places that they can afford to live, that they can raise their family in safety. That's institutional racism.
I've demonstrated that I have zero tolerance for discrimination, whether it's in our employee handling of situations or any other employee situations or housing, discrimination based upon race, sexual orientation, national origin, religion, creed, zero tolerance. Now I understand the basis of institutional racism. I don't subscribe to much of what is in the book you gave me as far as the new Jim Crow laws, because when it comes to the enforcement of laws, there's a victim somewhere. The police are called, and there's a victim. There's a complainant. And then it's not up to the police officer, it's not up to this mayor to pick and choose which laws we're going to enforce. There's really not much gray area. Now, if there's a way to negotiate it away, if there's a way to talk to the complainant and say, well, was it really this or that? But that's up to the justice system, the criminal justice system, to handle. And a lot of times with first-time offenders, there's the pretrial interventions, there's the plans and things like that. But we still must demonstrate that, you know what? There are consequences for making bad choices. And if we can catch it early, we can do something about it. But there's still a victim at the end of the day.
We've got to start investing, and we have to create jobs. I mean, one of the things that I saw happen in Tallahassee, and the same thing happens here, is we spend money on things that cost so much more, like incarcerating people, than it does in providing education, substance abuse, rehab programs, mental health counseling. It's so much cheaper to invest the money on the front end than it is to spend it on the back end. And when we have excess dollars, to not take those monies and invest them into the community makes no sense. So to me, that's an easy one, and it's a yes.
Well, as many of you all know, I am the one who's identifying all of those large fund balances. And it's interesting how the fund balances have changed names over the years, and there are significant fund balances still available in the yes. I am committed to using those funds in order to develop our community and move us forward. I think it's, again, such a shame that $3.8 million was spent on the lens proposal in light of all the opposition to that. Just think where that $3.8 million could have been spent in our community. And I think that's the difference between me and the others, is that I'm willing to take a stand, and I'm willing to point out, hey, let's pause, let's take our time, let's take it right.
Well, the beauty of being, I got to keep this on. The beauty of being your mayor for the past 3.5 years, you hired me to be a steward of your money. It's not my money, it's your money. If it were my money, I could say, yes, we'll spend our savings account on all of these things and make promises that ultimately you should know that we can't keep, but it's your money. And the word excess would lead you to believe that we have an excess. We have reserves. Whether it's economic stability, general fund, we have reserves, and it was the city council that placed targets, or a percentage of general funds that placed targets for these reserves. And on these funds, we don't have any excess. If a natural disaster came through, and we know what has happened with FEMA, and we know we can't rely upon the federal government or the state government, we have to be able to provide for ourselves. If a catastrophic event comes through, we've got to be able to take care of our own. And so that's what these reserves are all about. Now, in sanitation, we have a healthy fund balance, but you know what? we're gonna take that fund balance and we're gonna buy a new sanitation fleet using compressed natural gas. It's better for the environment, lower maintenance, better mileage, it's all good. So where we have fund balance, we're going to use these.
Run the school district. And while these discussions about the school district are useful, what I want to know from the mayoral candidates is what will be your strategy to collaborate in ways that you can produce money, concrete funds, to implement the 2020 plan, which has already analyzed all this stuff and has a design for having South St. Petersburg change its status in relation to all the other communities in St. Petersburg, and everybody wins because it eliminates by 30% the cost of supporting poverty in South Petersburg.
And that's a great point. And it's all about relationships and partnerships. Now, Mr. Kreisman talked about, a previous administration that could go out and find money. And I agree, we could find money. The feds had it, the state had it, we had it, everybody had it. But guess what? You read the papers, you watch the news, you know that money dried up. There's this thing out there even now called sequestration, where even the government was going to shut down, and they started defining employees by non-essential. So yeah, things are tight, but guess what? We have walked through the valley of the shadow together, and we've come out the other end, and we've got mortgage foreclosure monies because Pam Bondi went to bat for the state and got money from banks that had deceitful lending practices, so there's some available there. Again, CDBG, neighborhood stabilization funds, project rebuild. There are funds now, again subject to sequestration, but there are funds available. This community redevelopment area that we're working on, I think is probably one of the greatest things we can do, not just because we'll wait 10 years to get an increment for tax increment financing, but because together, collectively, the county and the city can work together to go after these funds. And yes, while the mayor is not the superintendent of schools, guess what? I worked closely with a new charter school that is opening next week, right there next to Enoch Davis, and we work together as partners to make sure that they open on time. They already have a waiting list. That's what mayors can do.
The question is the strategy.
Well, my strategy with respect to the school component, because I think that really is the key, is education. That's why I think the city can play a role with preschool, preparing kids for school. We all are familiar with the way women's infant children funding for food, and now it's been transformed into SNAP. Again, these are food programs, and of course everybody knows food is very important for newborn babies.